My ammo to buy a new machine. Yeah. All right, there's a new stream. You guys make sure that that one's actually working, and we can continue. Okay, so hopefully that's up. Very impatient. Anyway, so we have a little note. The idea behind it is you want to pass in 2 parameters, ideally number, to check that in the bonus. If they're both the same, you're going to console log out true, right? So how do we pull the arguments out of the command line? We have this process object. Does anyone know what the process object? Can you explain that? Basically represents the process we're running, right? It's their abstraction around that. It has just some information about what you're doing, the name of the process, so on and so forth. You have this argv, which is an array, and you pull out index 2 and index 3. Index 2 and index 3 instead of index 0 and index 1. Yeah?
There's no 0, and then the bigger file is index 1.
Absolutely.
You won't get an argument that you use.
Absolutely, that's correct. Great job. Yeah, so we pull out arg1 and arg2. These are the command line arguments we pass in. We're going to go ahead and see if they're equal. Why do we use...
Not comparison.
It's, what was that?
It's not a comparison.
It's not a comparison? What do you mean?
So if you do double equals, it's a comparison. Comparing 2 things does not tell you
Sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Right. So there's a difference between that. Awesome. Again, great answer. Thank you. Double equals is a loose comparison, effectively, right? And what it does is, say I had, I'm sure JJ's covered this, but say I had 1 and then the string 1, the double equal says those are the same because it doesn't care about the type, right? So this is a string and this is a number. What it cares about is the value, the content. Now this, on the other hand, saying they got to be exactly the same. One has to be a number, the other has to be a number. One has to be 1, the other has to be 1, right? And so that's the difference. You think there's value in doing the double equals over the triple equals, or what one do you guys think intuitively you should use more often? Any idea? Generally in the industry, you got it? Yeah?
I was going to say value in both.
There's value in both? Why is that?
If you did a loose comparison, then maybe if you were trying to compare like the numbers that the user entered, you have to make sure to like parse it first.
Okay, yeah, so you don't have to like turn it into a number. You can just hope that it is a number, right? That is an awesome answer, and I would say, yeah, there's value in both. So the answer we got was loose comparison can make it a little easier sometimes. You just need the content, right? You don't necessarily need it to be a number. If you're parsing from the command line and it's a string, you don't have to convert it to a number and then do that stuff. But the strict comparison does require you to actually convert it and have the data type that you need to work with, right? So there's value in both in a lot of scenarios. Most people tend to stick to the triple equals because it's safer. And you won't really realize that until you're writing a big application. You see a double equals and you're like, well, I have no idea what the hell they're actually comparing anymore because it's JavaScript. It does whatever it wants. So there's value in both for sure. When you're doing a comparison like this, though, we probably want to stick with the triple equals because we know they're both going to be some form of number. They'll probably be a string. Either way, they're going to be the same thing, right? In that case, we're going to console log true. Otherwise, we're going to console log false. And then the bonus. What does the % sign mean? Does anyone know? What was that? Remainder, yeah. So it's called the modulo and the modulus or whatever. Basically, this is read arg1 mod 7, okay? And what it says is divide arg1 by 7, and then output is the remainder. Exactly, it's the remainder. And we're checking if the remainder is 0. And if that's the case, for both of them, we can print true. Now, here's a good question for you, too, on this bonus that's interesting. arg1 is coming in from the command line as a string, but we can do modulo 7. That doesn't make any sense. It's a string. Yeah? Does anyone know what that is? You said it?
It sees that there's a math operation, and it sees if it can turn that into a number, and if it can't, it doesn't.
Absolutely. So the answer was type coercion. Basically, arg1, it checks when you do that modulo operator. It says, hey, these should both be numbers. I know that for a fact. If arg1 can't be a number, there's going to be a problem. If arg1 is a number, I can convert it to a number, divide it by 7, and then do this operation. So type coercion is very powerful. It's abused in JavaScript because JavaScript doesn't have a type system. So it's dangerous, but in this case, it's pretty simple comparison, so it's not that dangerous, right? However, you can imagine if we're using these command line arguments 5,000 lines of code later, you may not remember anymore. The context may not be there of what it was supposed to do. So then it can become kind of dangerous, but it's a cool little thing. So that's the base example here. Solution 2 is like a more refined version, I suppose, if you want to say that. The idea behind it is you don't got to assign any variables. You can just pull them out of the array and directly compare them. And the value of this comparison, this equals, is going to be true or false anyway. So there's no reason to console log true, console log false. You can just console log the comparison. Now I'm going to caveat in here. They say this is the more elegant refactored solution because you're not assigning variables. Like I understand the inline type check or the inline comparison here with the triple equals because it returns true or false. There's no reason to console log true or false also. But is it necessarily the case that it's cleaner when you're not assigning variables? That's something that's up for debate. And I would say it could actually spur a nice long debate between people who may or may not know what they're talking about, right? It's kind of preference. But I don't always agree that that is better because it gives more context as to what you're doing when you assign it to a variable because you can rename the variable, right? In this case, it's arg1 and arg2, so it's not that big of a deal. And again, this is a trivial example. But imagine I have process argv of index 2, arg1, and that's supposed to be your name. And I call this variable name, and I'm using name the rest of the time in the code base. It's a little bit more intuitive as to what I'm expecting there. When I call it arg1, or I just use process.argv index 2, I have no idea what the context of that is, right? So there's a contextual thing for the people who are reading the code when you assign variables, and that's something to keep in mind when you're working with other developers because you'll read this code 5 months later, they'll read this code, never seen it before. They won't know what's going on sometimes. But this is another way you can do it. Any questions on this stuff? Cool. All right. We are going to go ahead and move on to the next thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about the internal modules today in Node.js. So did you guys just start Node the last class, right? Okay, so we're still fresh on Node. Who knows what the require statement does? You talked about that already? No? Some? A little bit? Does anyone know what it does? Do you know what it does?
Brings in exports from whatever other module.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings in some exports from another file. And what exactly does that mean? That means you have code somewhere else, in this case, built into the Node.js system in something called FS that you can execute. You can use that code, right? But you need to get it somehow. And in Node, we use this require statement to bring it in. So var fs. Does anyone want to tell me what's happening in this line 2 right here where it's var fs equals require fs? We're bringing code in. Yeah, what's up? Nope. What was that? It's bringing in the file system code, right? It's bringing in the file system code from Node.js, and we're assigning it to a variable y. How else are we going to use that code, right? We have to assign it to a variable so we can actually use it. I mean, granted, I could do .write file. Sure, that works too, but that seems kind of verbose, right? To just like call require fs everywhere I need it. The interesting thing about Node.js, we're all familiar now. We've seen objects, right? We've seen variables. We've seen functions as variables. What's happening when you call this require in Node.js is it's returning an object. Sometimes a function, sometimes a variable. Depends on what it is. But it's anything that's valid JavaScript like that, right? So what was that? Stream's down? Sick. Streamers are going to have a bad night. I'm telling you what. Anyway, I have to bring this back up. It says it's still up on mine. Are you sure it's down?
Are you sure it's down?
Okay, that was Dan's fault. It's not actually down. Yeah? Okay. All right, so anyway, this require can bring in anything that's like a valid JavaScript. So you can imagine let's say that FS looked like this, right? File name, text back, something. You can imagine that's what the FS is internally on Node. And that's why we're assigning it to a variable so we can reuse it easily. It kind of makes sense. Like it's an object. It's something that you can use in JavaScript, like any other thing you would assign to a variable. So let's talk about this FS write file. So I just explained, we have this object that has some functions on it. One of those is write file. Write file has 3 parameters. Is the name. When you can see in the left-hand side of my screen under that write.js, there's no other files. Movies.txt does not exist. Not at this time, right? There's some arbitrary text here. Inception, Die Hard. Those are some movies. And then there's this function. Anyone have any idea what this function is? Why it's there? Why can't I just write the file? Why do I need to have a function here that takes in, it looks like an error? It's a callback. What does that mean?
Once it's done completing the write file function, it calls your callback function.
When it's done writing the file in FS, it's going to call your callback to tell you it's done. Does anyone know what this concept is called and what it allows us to do in Node?
There's a lot of Ajax.
We did this with Ajax requests. You're right. And what that is asynchronous programming. So the idea behind it is asynchronous function, which means it does not just happen, right? It happens when it can. And when it's done, you have no idea because it's not just happening. I'm FS console immediately, right? And functions like that. And now I have a callback. And what's different is, again, like I said, we're not guaranteeing when write file is ever going to end. It could end tomorrow. It could end in a million years. It could end immediately. It depends on what your machine's doing and what Node's doing. So if I were to mimic that right here, I could call this callback, right? We'll call it CB because we're going to name things. And it can do console log, woo, and I can call callback, right? I'm going to call that callback. It is something. I'm going to do something with it. Now, if I were to call function, I have to have a callback. Now, if I were to call this function right here on line 9, what am I going to see written out in the console? You're going to see woo and then oh, right? Or whoa. But they're not happening. In this case, they're still synchronous because there's nothing weird going on here. But this is effectively what we're seeing with the write file. Something along these lines. Now, the difference that makes it asynchronous as opposed to what I just wrote, which is still synchronous, actually. When it goes to do write file here in FS, it's doing something deep down in the native code of Node.js that's no longer in JavaScript. It's in C++ or something like that. And it's doing some stuff. And then what it has to do is tell your JavaScript that you're done because we're no longer in JavaScript. So we're not waiting for this thing to happen anymore. We're just letting it happen. And it calls back this function. If something bad happened during the process, it tells you. It gives you an error. You can console log that out and not do anything. Otherwise, you have to continue on and you know that the file exists, right?
Real way to know if it succeeded without an error. Like if error console log else do something else.
Yeah, if the error is null or undefined, it succeeded. Now, if for some reason your error comes back as null or undefined and it did not succeed, your machine is just busted, throw it away. So basically right here, see how it's checking? It's checking if error exists. And if the error exists, we know for a fact it did not succeed. If the error does not exist, we know for a fact it did succeed. That's your check.
It's checking if it's truthy.
It's checking if it's truthy. So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. This is right here, this if ERR, we know errors are not Booleans, right? And we have to check Booleans. So you can look at an error as something like that. That's an error. That's the shape of this object we're getting back in this callback. But we're actually checking its quote unquote truthiness. Now, does anyone want to tell me what the truthiness of something in JavaScript is? What's the truthiness of an object? How do you know if the object's going to be true or not? If it's defined, yeah, that's it. If the object exists, it's true. Otherwise, it's false. So if this was undefined, that would be false. If this were null, that would be false. If this were an empty object, that'd be true. If this were an empty array, that'd be true. Because it's an object. It has something. It is true, I guess. But this isn't type coercion. We're not turning this into a Boolean here. We're just, there's a special trick that some languages allow you to do. In this case, JavaScript allows you to do it very well, called this truthiness check. In a typed language, like C# or something, you'd have to do something like this. You have to explicitly check if it's not null. And forgive the symbol. That's the exclamation point equals. I have an extension that adds these ligatures, and it looks all pretty and kind of irritating. So, but that still that does not equal, right? But because JavaScript is dynamic and allows for interesting things, you get that truthiness check. So about this code that we just talked about, right? All of this right here. Any questions? I know we just went into a lot. Yeah, what's the question?
So FS, it's requiring, FS is an external script, like you have to download it, or is it built into Node?
FS is built into Node.
So there's no downloading anything for that.
There's no downloading anything for that one. We're going to get into this. There are a few packages that are just like built into Node. Just you get them for free, and you can find out what those are, and we'll talk about that in a couple of exercises. So I'm going to run this. We're going to see what happens. So if I just do node write, type, movies.txt was updated, and then you saw that file appeared. So look, console log movies.txt was updated. Obviously, there wasn't an error because I would have got a weird console log with this error object. And this file appeared. Inception and Die Hard. Notice, too, something really interesting. The file didn't exist and WriteFile created it. So WriteFile has the special property of saying if this file doesn't exist, I'm going to make it. If it does exist, I'm going to do what? Append? That's your guess? It's a really good guess.
Overwrite.
It's actually overwriting. And we'll see why in a moment. And the reason why is because there's an append file function. That's why. So I don't know. There's a difference between write and append at the system level. And they're still adhering to those system level kind of practices in Node. So when you hear the word write, when you're dealing with a file, you should expect it to just overwrite everything. You're literally writing that file. You can imagine it didn't exist and it created it. When I call write again on that file, it's going to blow it away. It doesn't exist and it creates it again. Every time. That's how you should envision it, right? Like it never exists. And it's just like, I'm going to do it. I don't care what you want me to do. So that's WriteFile. Any more questions on this? I know this is a lot to process here. There's a lot going on. No, cool. So one thing I want to ask, this one's a real brain buster. There's a function in FS called WriteFile. There's also a function for reading files. Does anyone know what it's called? fs.readFile? That's a good guess. That is exactly correct. They weren't very creative on their naming, but I suppose that's a good thing. So we have our movies.txt. It's exactly like we just saw with the writing. But this is slightly different. You'll see the structure of the read file is very similar to the write file. Oh my gosh, VS Code. So again, we have this built-in FS package. We're going to go ahead and require it. We're going to set it to a variable so we can get to all the fun stuff in it. It still has write file. I could still call FS write file before or after I call this read file, but we're actually just going to look at the read file now. So read file takes in the file's name. It takes in the relative path from where you're at, right? So does anyone have an idea what that means? The relative path from where I'm at. Yeah.
The working directory, like if you were to go into the console and write PWD into your working directory.
So if I were to go in the console right now and type PWD, you think I'm going to get whatever this directory is that I'm in at this moment?
I don't know where VS Code's console is for sure.
Yeah, I'm. Don't worry about where I'm actually at in my machine. That's your guess, and that's correct. That's where I am on my machine. Media, Carson, secondary, full stack lesson plan, O1 class content, 10 Node.js, blah, 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 blah. That's right. It's like a PWD. You were to append a PWD in front of it. This next one is interesting. Does anyone know what file content encoding is? You don't really got to worry about it. Not for a while. Most things are UTF-8. All these characters you're seeing on the screen right here, right now, are UTF-8. It's just a general encoding of text. That's a way different topic. But when you're doing read file, you have to tell the type of encoding. Sometimes you won't have a UTF-8 file. Sometimes you'll have something that's purely in binary. Sometimes you'll have something that's in some other crazy UTF-16 or even just ASCII or something like that, which qualifies UTF-8. And you can change that encoding if you need to. I think it defaults to UTF-8, but you should put that in there just to be safe. UTF-8. One word, all lowercase. And the next thing we have is a callback. Very similar, although has one major difference, and that is it has two parameters. Error and data. Error function is very much the same. I can't read that file. Error, too bad, sucks for you. Something bad happened. You can guarantee that you did not successfully read the file. If error is null or undefined, data is probably, maybe, going to be something. Now, here's the caveat with a read file. Technically, the file could have nothing in it. You could successfully read it and still get nothing back for your data, right? But you read it. So as long as you know that the error is null or undefined, you did read the file. Because odds are if you go to read the file and it doesn't exist, something bad might happen, right? It's going to say, I don't know what you're trying to read. We can go ahead and log the data. We already know that we have inception, comma, diehard. So we can go ahead and split the data, string.split, right? This is a string, this data, because it's reading it directly from this file. And we gave it the content encoding of UTF-8, which says it's just a string, and it brings the data in as a string. So we can literally do string things to it, and .split is something you could do on a string. What does .split do? Anyone? Splits it? How so?
By the delimiter.
By the delimiter, which is, in this case, a comma. So we're going to have two strings in this data array, data R. The first one's going to be the first thing we run into before a comma. The next one's going to be the next thing. In this case, we have inception, comma, diehard. One caveat. The first one's going to be inception. The second one's going to be diehard, but what's the caveat of diehard? Can anyone tell me what it's actually going to be? Yeah. Space diehard, exactly. Because what it does is splits on the delimiter, but it keeps everything else. So if your delimiter was comma space, well, then it'd be diehard. But it's not, so that sucks. You have extra space. And so that's something to take into account every time you're dealing with strings too. Those kinds of things happen. Then we just log it out. So if I go ahead and run this really quick, your node read.js, there you go, inception, and then you can see here in my console, we actually have in the quotes space diehard, right?
To be rid of that, we could have to go for each and do a trim.
So you could do a for each and do trim. So trim actually works on the whole string on both ends. So if the space is on the front or the back, trim will get rid of it. It won't get rid of internal space. Yeah. So if you did a for each on all the characters and did a trim, anything that was a space would be gone. So you'd actually get rid of the space between die and hard as well.
But if you did a for each element, for each on the array, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I misunderstood that. Yeah, absolutely correct. He could do a for each over these elements because one's inception, one's diehard, run a trim, and voila, you've gotten rid of the extra space. It was that simple, right? Now let's see what happens though when we get an error. Oh man, that's an error. That's how they come back when you console log them. Enonet, However you want to read that. Error, no such file or directory. Open movies2.txt. So, especially with file system errors, you see these weird, like, cryptic symbols. In this case, it's E, no, ent, or entry, or whatever. You get a weird error number associated with it. In this case, -2. You get a code, and the code is the same thing. And then you get some other information about what you were trying to do. Syscall here is interesting. That's the actual system call on the Linux machine it was trying to activate to open the file, if you're really interested in that stuff. And then the path you were trying to open, movies2.txt. Can't do it. We got an error, so we didn't parse anything. That file doesn't exist, right? We run it here. Well, we get our stuff. So let's do a for, right? And let's console.log s.trim. More question, this is asynchronous because it's got that callback. If you weren't going to provide that callback, so say you were like, you know what, I don't want it to be asynchronous, it would fail. It'd blow up immediately. It wouldn't even get to the callback. It'd just be like, you need to give me a callback. What are you doing? A quick thing that Node has that you probably may or may not want to use is a sync version. This functions exactly the same way, except instead of calling a callback, it would return the buffer. So you'd actually get data right here, as opposed to in the callback. Now, they don't talk about those in these lessons. They might a little bit later. The reason why is you're generally preferred to use the asynchronous version kind of file system operations. And the reason why is Node.js is what's called a single-threaded application, okay? So by that I mean when you're running code and you see the code running or running, what you see is what you get. If you were to debug through this var fs equals require, then I go to the, and then if we were to do sync, it would keep going down in order. It always does that. And there are some other paradigms in programming where the function itself can spawn these other things called threads, which are like another node process, and they just do whatever they want. The disassociated process. But Node doesn't have that. And what that means is everything you do costs something to the application you're running. You have to think about everything you do. And so we have these asynchronous callbacks to basically say, I'm reading a file. There's a lot that's happening when I read that file. We have to go out to the system. The system has to find the file. It has to allocate some memory. It has to grab the strings. It has to bring them back to us, right? And there's a lot happening in that sequence that if we weren't to use an asynchronous callback, would block everything, right? It would literally wait until it read the file before you did anything else in Node. And you can imagine if the file was 10 gigabytes, that would actually take a really long time. And your application would do literally nothing while it was reading that 10 gigabytes. But in this case, with this asynchronous code, we can say, go read it. Do whatever you're going to do. I'm going to do my thing. Keep running some Node code, having fun, whatever. And when you're done, you tell me. And you call me back, right? Give me a call. Pick it up, call me. And you tell me what's going on. Then it gives you the data, and your Node process comes back here and says, let's finish. So it's very abstract. It's kind of a very high-level view of why we need this. But the point being, when you're doing something like a file system operation that is theoretically very expensive, you don't want to wait for it to be done. You want it to just do its thing and call you back later. It's way more effective. And that's generally what you see in the industry. That's generally how you'll write your code. Any questions on this? We're going to go look at the documentation really quick for the Node APIs. If you have questions, feel free. So it was brought up earlier. The question, is this built into Node or is this a package you like download or something? And the answer is it's built into Node. Right here, I'm on the, it's hard to see, nodejs.org/API/fs.html. That's that file system module. See right here, I can scroll it into view, file system, it's highlighted. These are all of the things that are exposed when I do var fs equals require fs. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. We have read file, we have read dir, we have read dir sync, read file sync, all kinds of stuff, right? We have all our write stuff. There's all of this going on. And there's other stuff too, HTTP. You want to make HTTP calls. This is how you find it. This would be, if we wanted to call stuff in HTTP, var HTTP equals require HTTP. This is the name of it, right? Net, say you want to call something in net. You go here and you can kind of see how net works. You can see how some of the functions work, right? You see some examples. They tell you a little bit about how the code works. There's a lot going on here. And these documents can be sometimes cryptic, but the Node APIs are actually pretty good. They at least give you an idea of where you can look. They tell you stuff that doesn't necessarily work. Right here, stability 0, you might not want to use that. The red thing says don't use that, right? But you can figure it out. You can see what things are available, why you'd want to use it, most stuff. Hey, this is how you get FS. Oh, hey, here's how you would delete a file. You call unlink. It requires a callback. Blah, 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 blah. It's helpful, especially in the beginning of your Node journey, right? Because you need to figure out all the stuff you can do for free. And this is it. This is the stuff you can do for free. This whole list of stuff. These are all potentially modules you could import in. Let's look at read file specifically because we've just been using that. Let's find it in here. We can see what I was saying and we can compare it to the documentation to make sure I'm not lying to you. So right here is an example of the function's definition in the API docs. So remember, the first thing it needs is a path. The second thing is an options. That's weird. It says options, but we gave it a string. The last one's that callback we need. So path could be a string, which we had a buffer, a URL, or even a number, I guess. It could be a lot of things, and this is what it's telling you. It can be a ton of things. And it does something different with everyone you give it, with every type of input you give it, but effectively it ends up being the same operation.
What would it do if you give it an integer?
So what would it do if you gave it an integer? That's a great question.
The first one?
Yes, actually, that's a very intuitive way to look at it. Is it the number of files and zeros the first one? The answer is absolutely, yeah, that's the case. So there's something called file descriptors in computing and modern operating systems. And Linux and Unix systems, so your Macs too, are like this, and Windows to an extent. It's a little different. But they have these file descriptors, which are effectively an ID for every file in the system. And the first one is 0, and it's your standard input. So when you type something into your machine, file 0, it thinks it's a file. It acts like a file. It's not really, but it is, which is kind of confusing, but it is. File 0 is actually listening for all of that. You can tap into file 0 and actually get all of the information. So when I type on the keyboard, you can imagine there's a text document filling up with everything I'm typing. The reality is that text document doesn't exist. What's actually happening is your machine is acting like a text document, and it's absorbing that information and putting it somewhere else. Somewhere you can see it. Your terminal, when you open that up, or VS Code or whatever, they're hooking into that file 0 to get what you're typing. File 1's your standard output. So you had to open up your command line and you see some garbage spit out to your command line, where you are, something broke, whatever. That's file 0, or that's file 1, I'm sorry. Standard output. File 2, standard error. So if you do console.error, you're printing to file 2. Everything after that is a legitimate file. So file 3, probably something you made, probably some other weird network thing. Your actual file descriptors for the files you make are probably like 10,856 or something weird, right? But you can use them. You can get the file descriptors from Node. There's an API call to be able to get them directly from a path. I'll tell you. So that's what the number is. So options can be an object or a string. We gave it the string, UTF-8. You can give it this encoding, UTF-8, in this options object if you'd like, and some flags. Don't worry about flags right now, but they basically mean you can do other stuff with your read, and you can give it different permissions with your read file call if you needed to. Then your callback, it tells you it's a function. First parameter is an error. Second parameter is a string or a buffer. Ours was a string. Ours was a string because we gave it an encoding of UTF-8, and it knows that it can interpret that as a string. Sometimes you'll say the encoding is UTF-8, and it'll bring it back as garbage. So, you know, you may not want that, but that means it probably wasn't a legitimate UTF encoded file. Other times you can get back what's called a buffer. Buffers are more confusing than they have to be. Basically, they're arrays of binary data. You have a buffer, you do toString on it, and guess what? You get the string content. So that's it. They're pretty simple. Just think of them as special arrays. So these are what the docs look like. They're intimidating. I get that. But they give you examples, and if you take some time to read through them and kind of see and digest what they're saying, you can figure most things out. Oops. Cool. So we have a little exercise we're going to do for the next 15 minutes. You guys could Slack out best things ever. Number 13. What you're going to have is a little file, .txt. You need to do it by comma, something like that, split maybe. And you need to print everything out in a loop. So we'll take about 15 minutes to do that. I will leave this open to you all. We'll get some other stuff though. What?
You can't use 4 of an entity next board. You have to
Yeah.
I don't think it's sarcastic. Ashley wouldn't do
It's possible to tell, especially when you don't know them.
all lowercase, no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It looks exactly like that. Just saying one
the thing with these things like this.
Are we gonna build on this activity or is that? Because I made this one synchronous and I'm worried that. Are you getting?
I think we're not building off of this. We're going into some more of the functions, and then we're doing like a totally different thing.
So sometimes we use the same like script, like
Yeah.
I tried to make it synchronous because single threads are better.
Yeah.
No, because you were talking about
Because your challenge is not challenging enough.
you were talking about the synchronous version. Were you trying to say that there's a reason? This is really never.
There's almost never a reason to use them.
But
They do include them, so you can use them. There are reasons to use them. If you want to explicitly block, then sure, use it. And there might be cases where you do.
that frees up your whole.
Yep. Well, if it's a command line application, it doesn't really matter. No one's going to know, right? But even so, yeah, there are reasons, but they're few and far between.
It's interesting to think that but it's still a single threaded application. So
Yeah.
It's not like writing out a single machine.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we're going to start talking about this one in just a moment here. All right, let's do it. So the goal was we wanted to get all the information out of the bestthingsEver.txt file, split it all, and then print it to the console. Very similar to what we did in that last exercise, right? Slightly different. First things first, we need what? We probably need FS, right? Yeah, that's true. We do. Once we have FS, we can go ahead and call read file. Remember, the first parameter, the path. Second, we're always going to leave as UTF-8 for now. Third, this callback. Now, one thing you always want to check is if there's an error. Because if you're running this and you accidentally had a typo, it just like fail, and it'd be really weird and kind of hard to tell. I mean, you'd know, right? Because something bad would happen. But either way, this is a nicer way to like show that error. Next thing we need to do is we have this data as a string. We need to split it by comma. Okay? So again, we're going to get that array of stuff, and we're going to split it. Leaves us with that array that we can then get the length of and do a traditional for loop over it. Now, in my example, I used a for of, which you might not have seen yet. It's just a cleaner way to do this in some scenarios. But using the for loop for now is perfectly valid. Nothing wrong with it. It's not a worse or better solution than the for of. You can go ahead and print out the element at each index in the array. Okay? So not much different than what we just did once we showed the example of how to loop through and print, right? Very similar to that. But it's still kind of intimidating because you have to remember the read file requires a callback. What are the order of the parameters? How exactly does this work? It's really hard to remember all of those things. And then you got to remember data is a string. We got to split the string, split it by comma, and then you got to remember how to loop properly, right? There's a lot going on here. And even if you've seen an example, that doesn't mean you can just regurgitate it perfectly, right? So I imagine this was tough. Was this tough? Yeah, this is pretty tough. You don't have any questions on it? Go ahead and look at what Best Things Ever has in it. So a bunch of stuff. It's like household items, right? I'm going to be up one. I need to go into the solve directory. I'm up one directory. I should be able to do node read best. And that's the kind of output you should be getting. Now remember, we're delimiting on comma, so we have these extra spaces in front. You could get rid of those if you did a trim. You don't need to. Not for this exercise. Are there any questions on this? Does anyone want to go over any of the concepts we've just been talking about again? Because they're here, they're in front of us. We tried to play with them now after talking about them for a bit. And I know I could stand up here and I could talk forever and tell you a bunch of things that are probably really cool, and you'll most likely remember none of them. So testing these concepts out yourself really is what, teaches you how to do them. So if there's anyone who struggled with any of this, or there was something they want to just talk about more, by all means, yeah. Okay.
Have to do return console or right?
That's a good question. Can you just do console.log? Sure, you could, but what's it going to do after I console log? Going to keep going, right? It's going to keep going. So I'm going to console log, and it's going to be like data.split. Boom, explosion. Data doesn't exist. We didn't ever read the file, right? So the return's there to save you some pain. You can also write it like this. Now, this is actually, I'm glad you brought this up. This is a great question, and we can talk some more about some other concepts here. Return the console log. This is an early exit. This is a pattern that you see often. It's called an early exit. And the idea behind it is there are parts in every function where you'll reach a certain pathway, right? And you can decide to continue one way or another. We could do an if, error, else, all this other stuff, right? Do we need to do that? Is there anything that happens after the else? Because there's nothing that happens after the else, we can just leave. We're done. We're done with this. There's no way we can continue. Because of that, the code looks a little cleaner. If I were to wrap it in an else, I have all these brackets. I have to put everything in brackets, and it's just more overhead mentally for me to kind of see what's going on, right? I mean, it's more confusing. It's not much more confusing, but there's more brackets. There's a lot more you got to keep in your head, and that's just irritating if you ask me. The less I have to do to think about this problem, the better. And in my opinion, early exits like this, they really solidify that. They make it cleaner, less code, less you got to write, less you got to maintain, right? So it's a really great question. Yeah, you want the return. It's going to protect you from terrible things. But There's something else at work here, and that is it's a good design pattern. Write your functions that way. Any other questions on any of this? Got 5 more minutes allotted to talk about this thing. So,
Oh, I made a typo and did a 4 in instead of 4 up.
there you go. Nice. Okay, that's a good one because there's a 4 in and a 4 of.
Yeah,
And
it was giving me numbers and I couldn't tell what I was saying.
That is an excellent point. So, I did the 4 of on my output, right? Which looks rs of output like so. Output.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, sorry, yeah, typo. There you go. I had a typo too. He did a 4 in. 4 in is slightly different. What it does is instead of returning the value at each index, it returns the index. So that's why I got numbers. You got 0, 1, 2, or whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. If you had an object, say output was an object, like this, you can actually do 4 in and 4 of over an object too. For a map and stuff. If I were to do 4 in, I would actually print A. If I were to do 4 of, I'd print true. Pretty powerful little loop statement there. But you got to remember, 4 in, 4 of, I always forget which one does what. All the time. It's very confusing because they're so similar. Yeah, what's up?
I used that same type of 4 statement though, and I got the words and not numbers.
You did a 4 in? So you...
Do a 4 in or 4 up?
Exactly, not that one, the one that you just said. Yeah.
4 of?
That, yeah, and it's
Yeah, 4
like, it's right, you know.
4 up where?
Like this? Yeah, 4 of...
Yeah, you just said you got numbers?
When I did 4 in.
When he did like that, 4 in. Yeah. So there's a slight distinction. It's not a very good one, but it's there. And that's what's confusing about it. Good question. Yeah. Any other questions on this? Yeah. Okay, so the callback. Let's talk about the callback a little bit more. So let's talk about if I were to write this by hand. Now this isn't perfect because it won't actually read a file. But let's create a function. Call a function read file. Just taking a path. We'll just take in options. We'll just call options for now, right? I'm taking a callback. Yeah, I do a bunch of stuff. Do stuff. It's gonna go read file. It's gonna do whatever it needs to do. Okay, doesn't matter. It's not really that important what it's actually doing because you're gonna get the information back. You know what info you're gonna get back because it's a read file, right? It's all done. Everything's good. In the ideal case, let's just say you have a string like this. That's your file contents. It's like I read the file. We're all good. I'm going to actually pass in null. That's the first parameter. That's your error. And I'm going to pass in file contents. If this read file right here were to be called and to work like this one, what I'm going to get back is nothing for the error and file contents. So it's interesting because there's a lot going on under the hood here with this read file. This is effectively what it's doing. Going out, grabbing that file, reading what's in the file, assigning it to a variable, and passing that stuff into this callback. Now I said if there was an error, you'll know it, right? If there was an error, something bad happens, it's like, hey, I've got an error. It would call a callback. An error. Or it might call it like that. But now we get an error in, but we don't get any data. So this callback right here has error and data, now has an error. When we check for an error, console log it out, something bad happened. We know it didn't read any data. So behind the scenes, this is what it kind of looks like. It's harder to explain than that because there's a lot going on, but that's the gist. Now what's hard is this being a function, you have to like keep in your head, I'm calling a function that takes a function and it does something with this function, and you know, it's very confusing, but Once you start to get an intuitive understanding how these functions work, it does make sense. It just takes a while. You had some to add?
Oh yeah, just from what we've seen before, this would be similar to the .then that we used.
Yeah,
And
so
these
with
are
promises, yeah, it's similar to the .then. Promises are another way to do these callbacks effectively. So, yeah. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and take a break. Did that answer your question to an extent? I know it probably didn't paint the whole picture. But go ahead and take a break, 15 minutes, and come back at 8, and we'll continue. Not really, but there's more to it than that. It is a way to get rid of these callbacks because you don't.
all it resolves, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If I have this callback right here, and say after I get and I read file, say I read one file and I want to take it to and put it in a different file. I did fs.write file. And we just put in the data. Well, now I have another callback.
Right. And that could also be a previously defined function.
It could, so it could look a little, usually look cleaner than this.
Yeah.
But even so, it doesn't always.
Right.
And this is what I like about Node, at least old Node, is you have to follow this pattern a lot, and it's called callback hell, because you don't, it's hard to like remember where you are in this chain, right? Like, am I here? What does here mean versus out here? You know,
It's not iterating straight through a program.
Yeah, it's jumping all over. It's very hard to kind of follow. So
.then is different because it's different
So-
in how it works, or because it doesn't create callback.
it uses a callback behind the scenes. So it still uses the callback. It's just a nice way to do it. So
Is .then a jQuery thing, or is it actually JS?
it's built into Node now. It's like a JavaScript thing now. So you imagine if I could use .then on this, I would data. And then you could like console log data, but then there's also .catch. Your error out. So it does change how it works. Oh, the arrow? That's equals greater than. Yeah, equals greater than. So it, yeah, equals greater than, like that next to each other.
Because when I first saw the ligatures, I was like, what?
Yeah, the ligatures are probably not a good idea to have on PG. I just forget that I have them on.
When I saw the triple, I was like, what font is that? I'm like, it looks like Courier do. Maybe it's Courier 10
It's called Furicode. So if you want to put it in whatever editor, most of them have Furicode support. So anyway, yeah, promises are a little different. They wrap around callbacks. It's a deeper topic for another day.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's a great question though, because they're important and you'll be using them a lot. So
So does that mean that there's a provision of the FS package that uses that, or is it all callbacks to that package?
it's all callbacks. You have to do it yourself.
So that there's other packages.
Yes. Actually, Node itself has a function built in called promisify. And you pass a function into it, it turns it into a promise. So
They saw the word stringify and said, that's a great way to name it.
something like that.
Oh, promisify. Yeah, write a promise. Okay.
I hate that every time I open an editor, it just does a bunch of stuff.
VS Code?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure your opinion of Electron is completely different. I've been working it every day. JJ doesn't like Electron.
Yeah, I could argue with JJ.
But it's interesting because everyone I've talked to has a negative opinion of Electron. I think it sounds good, right? I mean, you work with it, so how's your opinion?
It's fine. It's another one of those things where it's very much just opinion. The fact of the matter is, it does something very well, and that's cross-platform development, and you can use Node and JavaScript to do it, and that's amazing. Yeah, sometimes it's slow. VS Code is not. Sometimes it's a memory hog. VS Code is. So it's like, what is your priority? Could you write VS Code in something like GTK Plus or Qt or something? Yeah, but it'd take way longer, it'd be way more expensive, it'd be way harder to cross-platform. So you got to look at the priorities.
Well, I mean, how much RAM does your old little book carrier have?
8 gigs.
Oh, then you're good.
Yeah, I mean, less than 8 gigs today anyway is already kind of a death sentence. So this,
One Chrome tab.
yeah, I mean, Chrome is worse. I mean, it's built on Chromium. So Chrome is even worse. So he better not be using Chrome because he used that argument. Does he use Chrome?
I don't know if he's ever argued, but I just heard it.
So if he says he doesn't use Electron, I'm going to say you better not use Chrome then, because it's the same damn thing half the
Chrome is
time.
a package.
So
Chrome uses
yeah, Chrome is a hog.
well, I just use the software that has the dev thing. If it has the developer base behind it, then it's the software too. If you're on anything else, there's no support.
Yeah,
It doesn't come down to how much RAM.
yeah. Not usually when you're a developer now.
You're kind of stuck. You always do the learning stack? Is that what you came into, or did you have another stack previous?
I used C#.net in the beginning.
That's C#, not Visual Basic.
I did Visual Basic too in VisualBasic.net.
And C# is better than Visual Basic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I did C#. I did some web dev stuff, but not really. Mainly desktop development.
How do you transfer to web? How do you web became desktop?
I started doing some web stuff at one of my first jobs. Actually, my first job was web stuff, but it was still in C# for a server. Real old web stuff. Then I started doing some web stuff for fun at one of my other jobs. I said, "Can I do this in the web?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And then I went to another job and I said, "We need to do more web development." Started doing more web development, and I did it at home too, for fun. And now I do almost exclusively web development. So
And then to your desktop development, your web development version.
yeah, it ended up that way.
Those were the days.
I mean, probably the evolution of Visual Studio over the years.
I've been using it since 2010, the 2010 version. So I probably actually started using it in like 2011 in school or something.
You started on the .NET Framework 4 or 3.5?
I honestly, well, my first project I worked on professionally was like .NET 2. But I probably started learning on 3.5, but I can't really remember.
You weren't using Visual Studio for your .NET development?
Yeah, I was. The first project I worked on was in Visual Studio 2008, and some of it was in 2010. And then at that point, 2012 was already out. 2013 was probably almost out. I did mostly 2013 at my first full-time job out of school. And then 2015, then I did some 2017 at my last job, and I haven't done any dedicated C# stuff for a while.
Try other flavors of Linux before you settle on like.
I've tried others since, but I pretty much started on Ubuntu. Tried Arch, tried.
You tried Arch, or you went through the whole brew of Arch?
I went through the setup once and hated it. I mean, it was fine, but then I just downloaded Manjaro and it was okay. I didn't use it enough. I've used CentOS and like Fedora and stuff at work, but I've not spent an extended amount of time other than with Ubuntu, so it's good enough if I just stick with it.
All the other ones are just.
Do some Debian, but it's not. It doesn't have everything I like. Like I'm not to want to worry about all the little nitty gritty. I want some of that taken care of for me. I just like the experience of Linux better. So.
Or it's too experimental. It's too featureless. Right? There's not enough.
I had to build this myself, so like I was like, I'm not gonna do that. That's a lot of work. Maybe for fun on this machine and to on it. I'll stick to Ubuntu for anything serious.
For production.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Is it doable? Like they try to like.
This no. This is just Ubuntu.
I'm still on Windows 7, and I have Ubuntu, but I don't want to put Windows 10 on anything. I don't want to ever.
Windows 10 doesn't bother me. It's okay. I don't really care, but I don't really like dual boot experience, so I mean if I have to, great, but I'd rather just use a VM. On my machine at home it's Windows 10, I just VM into.
You don't want to provision your hardware.
It's a lot of work.
The USB stick partition.
Yeah, it is. I just don't. Well, I'll mess something up. I don't want to do that on my home machine. I have lots of documents on it and stuff. I need to back them up. But.
I guess that's true. I guess you'd only do it if you have a clean disk.
Yeah, but a clean disk would be fine.
At your work, is it all like Mac or all Windows or all?
No, there's one guy on dedicated Linux. I'm mostly on Windows. A few other are mostly on Windows, and most of them are mostly on Mac.
But you got like all three working together, coexisting peacefully, or is it Mac?
No, it's fine. Some of us do. I've had some features where I've had to go on all three regularly, so it depends. We all have dual boot machines, Mac and Windows, except for the one guy who does Linux. Yeah, he has all Linux. So.
I hear about like web like companies that are like web developers. All these
Yeah, I don't like Mac. I don't really like Mac at all.
There's about as many Macs as there are HP
Yeah.
HP takes the cake on most stuff. Next one's Dell.
Yeah. What can you do?
I never updated. There's a few outliers. Steve and JJ have those System 76.
I want to. I'm getting a System 76 next.
Really?
Yeah. The one I want's like $1,700. So. All right. Is everyone ready to move on? Get started again? We're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about one more method in FS, and then we're going to go ahead and do a pretty big exercise, actually. So this one is append file. We kind of talked about it briefly earlier. We talked about writing versus appending. What would it do if you call write file on an existing file, it overwrites it, right? Well, sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you don't want to destroy a file. Sometimes you do want to append to it, and you can with append file. So on this one, they're trying to make it fancy. So they're actually taking the file name out of the command line arguments, right? So process argv2, because that's going to be our first argument after the command name, text file. And to that text file, we're going to go ahead and append the word hello kitty. And if there's an error, we're going to say, there's an error and print it. If there's not, we'll say content added. Now, in this case, they're using the else. You can if you want, or you can do return after the error or whatever. Consistency's nice, so it's at least consistent in that regard. Let's see what this bad boy does. So if I just do node append file, I get this crazy thing right here. Binding.open, path module, bunch of crazy stuff. Path must be a string or buffer, blah, blah, blah. I didn't give it a path. So there was no argument at index 2. Test.txt. Content added. Whoa, but it created the file. But it's append file. That's crazy. Well, append file can also have the option to don't exist. What happens if I call append file again? Uh-oh. I can do this forever, and we'll just keep adding Hello Kitty. So it depends to the file, right? This is how you add to the file without destroying anything. Fine. Add the little new line character in there, right? Go ahead and do that. Now I actually have hello. So works very same kind of, again, the name of the file, the content, and then a callback, which is there. Yeah? So sure. I like that. Can we change this to process argv3, have our content? Sure. Oh, I was supposed to write test there. I didn't. But there it is. Now what happens if I do a space? It's going to count as a new command line argument. But there's a way around that. Write it in double quotes, counts it as one thing. So if you have a space in your argument, put it in double quotes, it'll count it as one argument. And there it is. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Is there a prepend like right to the top of the file?
There might be. Why don't we go look at the API docs?
Okay.
There might be an option for append or something that does it too. Good question. So first we can quickly get to the top here and we can scan and just see if there's a prepend. Don't see anything there. P. Doesn't really look like it. So let's go to append and see what kind of options it has. It has a mode, which is probably the file mode. So I don't think so. I think you'd have to take the contents out and adjust them with what you want in front and rewrite the file. It's a harder operation for appending, I guess, computationally.
Yeah.
Any more questions on this append? Again, it follows the same pattern. Cool. So we're going to move on to a nice big activity that's going to let you test out all of these things that we just have seen. The read file, write file, all that fun stuff. I'm going to show you what it does really quick. So called bank.js, that's what it's called, right? And so you're effectively acting like you're a bank. And you'll have this bank.txt file, and this is effectively your account. And it's going to keep track of your account balances. There's a bunch of stuff in here already, and that's not super important yet. So let's do node bank.js. This is some of the stuff you're going to have to do. Total. you the total of your balance in this bank.txt file. Node bank.js. Let's deposit 10. Total again, 38, right? So it's going up. What else can we do? We can withdraw. Draw 10. Right to our total, 2881. And now there's another one too. This one's like a bonus fun functionality called Lotto. Sorry. Basically the idea, here you go, so you can just keep playing. Lost 25 cents, we lost 3 times in a row. If I get to go to my total, you can see it was 2881, now 2806. Okay? So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have this text file with a bunch of different things in it to track like our balances. It looks like it's a comma delimited list, okay, of our balances. We're gonna file command line, execute a command, and alter this file. And probably tell us something. So you got 30 minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about it. Yeah, it's gonna take a while. If you guys could slack it out. If you finish early, if anyone does, they have this note in there. Add some extra functionality to this to make it, extra spicy.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. We're gonna build it. Just one. Oh, it doesn't. Yeah, you're right. Very good. Zero. I'll start. What are we supposed to do? Okay, let's work on this. Yeah. The next switch thing, that's gonna be very similar to that. We can, instead of just doing console, we can call different functions that handle what we have. So we're gonna need a total function, and then a composite, a withdrawal, still with one other like a lot of it, which I don't have to really agree with. Okay, so this will take another second. All right. So let's figure our switch statement as cases for all four of those different functions, or all four of those different. If you graph it in the functions that take in the value for what we call the withdrawal or deposit. So let's wrap this for both. Yeah, wrap it in the function. Let's use some two parameters: the operator and the dollar one. Yeah, exactly that way. So these functions. Yeah, just something to do. So then we can now, inside the curly braces, we'll create our switch statement. So we'll switch all we're going to evaluate is the operator. Handle the amount that we call withdrawal or call deposit. So now these three goes to 2. And then we're going to have some different cases. The first case is going to be total. The effect for second case. And total can be a string. Do you want to copy it? Well, leave the outer function. Yeah, just the switch statement part. Throw that in there. So, in that second, right after the, yeah, without, instead of doing the console log, let's just call a function, we'll create a function here, let's just call function called total. And then it doesn't give the whole thing. So this whole function is called yeah. And this is gonna, and this will call a function called positive. Well, this is the one where we're actually considering the dollar now, we just need to go yeah. If well, not as a string, it's like a, but for all of you, and then we're effectively going to replace all this console logs with function calls, and we'll create those function calls. So very clear. Yeah, deposit, and then it's going to give you an amount. Perfect. Exactly. And then same basic thing, so we'll have withdrawal as well. That's good. Well, the withdrawal function takes a number, and then the last one is just log. Ready? Okay, cool. And then you can just default to total as well. You should have a default statement. So default total. So lotto is going to go lotto. Default is total. Pretty you have to default okay, cool. Now we've got a function. Now we can create our different functions, like a little withdrawal, and all of that. Why don't we just create all those different functions? We're not going to like add anything. We're just adding console log like a total is small. These are going to be outside of this scope right here. So that's function right there. Yeah, just do a function total, function withdrawal, function deposit. So create all these functions and with function and then call it total. No, it's the function and then the word total. And then the databases. Or then the parentheses. Well, for sure. All we're doing is adding everything up. We're going to pass parameters and yeah, that was just console log right there. Yeah, like a string is like that's the only way we can really know if the function ran using SJS because all we have is the terminal. The function is this one takes time. Remember? So it's right here with the console log. Deposit is called. With this number, and then just concatenate with the number. So we're actually testing this number as well. Perfect. It's basically going to have the same thing for withdrawal for right now. Just get everything set up.
We're going to go over this in just a couple of moments, so kind of wrap up what you're working on.
So at the bottom is small banking. We're going to pass process RQ index.
What? Yeah, you tried it out. How'd it work?
It works. The problem is because our scope right now, we don't have that many callbacks.
Yeah.
You can.
You're right.
It does work.
You have a good point. You're right. Yeah. All right. Is everyone ready to talk about this? You can finish up your last thoughts, and then we'll get into it. Oh, come on, VS Code. Open stuff for me.
So the default, we didn't actually pass it in the total.
All right, we're gonna start going into it. Did anyone finish? Nice. We did have a few people finish. That's awesome. There's a lot of work here, and it was a tough exercise. Most definitely, because we were combining everything we've talked about today into one exercise. Did you remember it all? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, we've gone over a lot. So, how do we start? Well, we're dealing with this bank.txt file, right? Which is going to be a list of our deposits, our withdrawals or deposits, what say you, that end up with our total amount, okay? So we know it's going to be a file, so we're going to need FS. If I'm using FS, probably safe assumption. Forget that. The other thing is we know that we're going to have an action, so total, lotto, withdraw, deposit, and then we're going to potentially have a value too that comes in with that. So we got to pull this from the command line. Again, the action, that first command line parameter, is actually going to be index 2, and then the value is going to be index 3. Then what do we want to do? Well, there's a nice concrete way to go through a bunch of different cases of potential actions, right? And that's the switch statement. Who remembers the switch? Remember that? Probably haven't used it that much, and you frankly will never really use it that much in your entire programming career. It's like the red-headed stepchild of the operators, right? The control flow operators. It's not used as often all the time. It is in some cases. If you guys get to Redux, it is. But anyway, we can use that case switch statement to go over the action, determine if we're doing a total, if we need to get the deposit, withdraw, if we need to run the lotto. So I have a question about this before we move on to the function implementations. What happens if we don't match any of these? It'll do the default, which is nothing, right? Yeah, it'll do nothing. And you can see, we'll go over these, but there's no other code that's invoked. There's just some function declarations after this. So let's take a look at total. So there's one assumption we can make about total already, is that it's not going to have a value, right? We just want to see the total. Let's go ahead and take a look at it then. So we have this function total. We need to read our bank.txt file. Again, it's going to be UTF-8 because we're just going to default to that, and we got to give it our cool callback. First things first, if there's an error, we're done. Let's not try anything else. Who knows what's going to happen? Second thing, we know that this is a comma delimited file. That was part of the requirements, right? That's why we know it. We need to go ahead and do a split to get all the different pieces of currency or, the different transactions that have been done inside of our bank so that we have them in a nice array. We can do something with them, right? But we have to remember that if you looked at that example file, it's delimited by more than the comma, right? We talked about this. It's delimited by a comma and a space. Readability, whatever you want to say. Does it need to be? No, but they chose to do it that way, and we need to take that into account. You don't have to handle it this way per se, but it's got to be handled. Because if you try to do the parse, it's a potential the parse might fail. We have a result. We're going to need to get a sum, our total, okay? We're going to need to know everything that's happening in this bank account, all the transactions. We're going to have to add them up. This is our result. We have them in an array. We can find out what the length of that array is. We're going to do this cool parse float function. Notice parse float is defined anywhere. That's because it's built into JavaScript. There's other ones you can do parse int or whatever, but parse int wouldn't quite work, right? Because does anyone know what an int is and what a float is? Know the difference? Yeah? There's a lot of people shaking their heads. What is it? A whole number? Yeah, an integer is a whole number. Exactly. And a float is obviously not. So we need a float because we're going to have cents. We're going to have, parts of a dollar, right? Not just whole dollars. Go ahead and parse it. Now, it's interesting. It says if parse float. Why the if? What happens if this fails? What do we get? Does anyone know? Well, we'll get some sort of falsy value.
And not really get money.
You'll get not a number. And I'm pretty sure not a number resolves to falsy. And therefore, it's not going to do anything. Not a number. NaN. You'll see that in code every now and then. If you try to do parse float on A, you're going to get NaN. It's not a number. And JavaScript doesn't even try. It's just like, dude, that's not a number. So, can't use it. So we check first, parse float. If parse float returns not a number, we obviously can't add it to our results. Otherwise, we can go ahead and just run parse float again and do it. Different way you could write it is you could assign this value to a variable. We could do, say num, right? Oops, sorry. Go in here, num, space there, look at that. Okay. Num, so if we have num, then we can do num. Doesn't change much. This is a very limited scope. You can imagine if this parse float was a really expensive function that took a long time to call, maybe you wouldn't want to call it twice, right? So it's just something to think about. But just a different way you can do it. Then we can go ahead and console log our total with this toFixed 2. toFixed 2 lets you print that result with the decimal to 2 decimal places as a string, effectively. If you had 5 decimal places, you know, tons of it. So deposit. Let's go ahead and look at deposit. Deposit, we know we're going to have a value, right? We have to deposit something. We can't just, I mean, we could deposit 0, I guess, but you're not going to get a lot out of that. So deposit's actually easy. We can kind of cheat, which is nice. Deposit, we're going to deposit 10 bucks, say, like I did in my example. All we need to do is actually append to the end of the file, right? Say we're doing $10. It's going to be 10.00, right, in dollars and cents. It's going to be a positive value. You don't need anything there to take care of that. We can literally just append it. We make sure we use the same delimiter here. So it's going to be easy to parse out later. We just add the value there. It's the value we pulled out of the command line. And voila, we're off to the races. It's stored. No problem. And then we just print the value again so you know exactly what it was that you deposited. So it's kind of cheating, right? You're not actually doing any math there. You're not even making it a number. You're kind of assuming it's a number. And that's the funny thing is I could deposit A, which doesn't really make sense. If it was a more legitimate application, I'd probably say A is not a number. You shouldn't do that. Maybe I would do a parse float here before I appended to the file so I could guarantee everything in that file was a number. It's a different way you can look at it, right? Moves that logic, that check, somewhere else. That's deposit. Like a cheat. Withdraw. How do we do withdraw? Well, deposit, yeah, we're going to put in the negative, exactly. I was going to say, deposit's positive, right? We're putting stuff in there. Withdraw is not, we're taking stuff out, so it's a negative transaction, right? It's just, you're taking stuff out. And again, you can just append it to the end. Voila, we have a negative value, and you can go ahead and, you know, I withdrew so much. No math, nothing, you don't even got to verify the number. Last one, lotto. That was a fun one, right? Basically, you have a chance to lose money or make a couple bucks. So what we do is we take away 25 cents. Like always, we just kind of let that happen. And here's an interesting case where the callbacks actually start to really require some thought, right? Because we're calling fs append file first thing. First thing we're doing is taking away 25 cents. But when will this inner block right here, which doesn't do much, it just checks if there's an error, when will this actually occur? At any random moment. It's just the way the JavaScript works. Because it's on that single thread, like I was talking about earlier, it'll just pick a time. If it's in the proper time of the event loop, which we haven't talked about much, but there's this thing called the event loop in the background. If it finds a good time in this event loop, it can just inject itself and say, like, now we're going to go ahead and finish the append file. That's what's weird about these asynchronous calls is they just kind of happen. So what we need to do is grab a random number. So we're just going to do our random plus 1 times 10, right? So we can get 1 through 10 or whatever. And if your chance is 1, so if your random number equals 1, then you go ahead and you get $2 more to your bank account. And we just add 2. And we just say, congrats, you won the lottery. Otherwise, we just say, sorry, you lost 25 cents. Maybe you should get a job, right? And we already know that you lost 25 cents because up here we automatically deduct it. We automatically do a withdrawal of 25 cents because that's what it costs to buy a lottery ticket. Then here we can just add the $2 arbitrarily as well. That's the interesting thing about this approach, is we're not doing any math until we're actually doing the total, right? One way you can do it, and you can do it other ways. You can always force the math to happen, and then the total just assumes it's numbers. This is the basic example here. Does anyone have any questions on any of these functions? Anything that's happening here? Anything need to be explained further? I mean, there's a lot going on, right? We call read file and append file a bunch, parse float, a whole bunch of stuff going on. The gist of it is, if you want to be able to take in command line parameters and execute something based off of those, this is the way you can do it. You can build this switch and tell the switch to invoke different functions based off of whatever that switch was. We could put a default there and say something like, that is not something you can do, right? Just in case they have a typo or whatever. So again, any questions on this? This is a big one. Took a while. Cool. All right. We are going to move on then. We're going to look at something that follows, we're going to move away from the file system here. So it follows a similar trend, but instead of talking to files, it talks to the internet files. So I'm not going to talk too much about this code just yet. The idea behind it is, you can see there's this URL to Wikipedia. The idea behind it is we're going to go to Wikipedia and we're going to do something. Okay? Probably we're going to get something from Wikipedia. Okay? I can go ahead and try to run this to show you what's going to happen. Pretty easy, right? Node, request.js. But something bad happens. Throws an error on that request function right here. Request is not defined. Request is not defined. Interesting. Anyone know why request is not defined? Maybe that link doesn't work? The link might work. I don't really know. I don't particularly care. But there's another reason why it's undefined. What did we do? Yeah.
We never defined it in the file.
Okay.
We need a script that we need to.
So how would we do that? How would we define it?
So it would be var. We would use the require like we did with the var request equals require.
Randy, it's called request. This one isn't built into Node. This is not something we have built into Node, and I'll show you right now. Because yeah, define now, but cannot find module requests. Now, when we brought in FS, we did not get that at all, ever. We didn't get cannot find module, and the reason why is FS is built into Node. We get it for free. We talked about that, right? We can find it on the API documentation. We pulled it up. FS just exists. You get it for free, sweet. But you don't get everything for free, and sometimes there are packages you want to use that are unrelated to Node itself per se, and you want to use them anyway. You got to figure out a way to get them. Does anyone have any idea how to do this at all? It's to do with another tool that we've installed. Has anyone heard of NPM? NPM? So NPM, Node Package Manager, you can tell it to install a module. NPM install request. It's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to install the module. You'll see this file system is going to change. Oh, man. What just happened? Is it request.js? No. Oh, I don't have access rights. Well, that'll do it. Sudo npm install request. It's not like that. Okay. Well, the good news is they give you one that has the package built in. So I'm going to just open that one up instead. If you do npm install request, it'll install it in any normal scenario. Just not today, of course. Anyway, what it installs is this package JSON. It'll like build this package JSON and inject in here request. Okay? And it builds this package lock JSON, which is just a way for Node to know that you have a certain version of request you want to use. It's not that important right now, but just know you'll probably want to keep it around, right? And right here, you can see var require request equals request. Let's go ahead and jump into the terminal and see if the npm install works from this one. npmi, shorthand for npm install. Okay, so I probably just needed to do an npm init to get the package JSON in there, and I was spacing. That's okay. So I did npm install. If I had done npm install request on the other one and it worked properly, you would have seen this node modules folder appear. You'll notice that it's got a lot more than request in it. This is something you'll run into a lot, but request exists. Everything else in here is something that requests use to do whatever it is it's doing. It uses a lot. It's kind of a running joke in the Node community that everything you install installs like 50 billion other things. Not that important, but you do need to take note of it. Anyway, request is installed. If I were to go run this now, node request, and spit back a bunch of stuff. You'll notice if you look at the end of the output, that closing HTML tag, it literally got the HTML from Wikipedia. And I just printed it on my terminal. Right? So right here, if I just go ahead and I copy this, let's open it in a tab. This is literally what I got. This whole page in the HTML form. Pretty easy to do, actually. You'll notice something, though. First parameter, this URL. Second parameter is that dreaded callback again. And it's a little different this time. First parameter is an error. Now, in Node.js, it's proper syntax, right? It's proper style to make sure when you have a callback, the first parameter is an error. So you can almost always guarantee, unless the package you're using really sucks or you're using really old Node stuff, that first parameter in your callback is an error. And that's just how it is. It's just how people do it. The second parameter in this case, though, this one has 3 parameters, which is different than what we've seen. The second parameter is a response object, which is a special object. And the third parameter is the body. Body is, as you can imagine, our HTML, right? Response is special, though, has stuff on it. In this case, it has a status code. Does anyone know what a status code is? Yeah, some of you do, maybe. HTTP status codes. You'll get into this pretty soon and a lot. They're not that hard. They're basically just saying, if you get a 200 status code, it says to you, everything's A-OK, here you got a bunch of stuff. And this request callback includes the response, so we can check that everything's OK, and the stuff that we got. So it's very similar to how we do the fs.whatever, so fs.write, fs.read. You can imagine this is like fs.read internet thing, right? Effectively what it is, just in a different module. So there's a couple of really important things here. One, there's other stuff that you can do in Node that isn't built into Node, and you have to install it. And that happens a lot. Two, lots of different things in Node use this callback system right here to do asynchronous code, okay? So you should get used to that. It's hard. It's hard to reason about. It's definitely a challenge, and it's not easy in the beginning, but you'll get it. You'll see it enough that you'll probably just through osmosis eventually start to understand. It'll just click one day. Trust me on that. Any questions on this? What we're seeing here? We're going to look at another example in just a moment before you guys do your exercise on it. So this isn't the only thing. We can talk more. All right. Let me open up the next example then, which is very similar. Right off the bat, some similarities, right? We have a package JSON and a package lock JSON. Let's look at this package JSON. It's slightly different. Not really. It has requests. Again, you're going to see this. See these dependencies? These are all the things you're using that aren't built into Node that you want to use. In this case, again, it's going to be request. Then we have this OMDB request.js. If I were to run this right now, what would happen? What would I get? Any ideas? Should I run it? Failed. Cannot find module request. I never installed it, right? Go ahead and run npm install. Now you can run this again when you have that package JSON that's populated. You can run npm install, and it just says, okay, I'm going to read that. I'm going to get everything. In this case, we only wanted a request. Go ahead and run again. Make sure it works. Hey, it works. This movie's rating is 7.8. Interesting. So we're talking to something that has to do with movies. In this case, if you look at this crazy URL here, might be hard to see for some of you. You can see that it starts with the OMDB API. OMDB is the backing database for IMDb. Pretty sure. Might not be. Sounds like it though. What we're going to do is make a call to that database, that API actually, and we're going to say, we want to get information about a movie. What movie? It could be any movie. In this case, we have this question mark T. If you're not familiar with URL syntax, question mark T says, question mark says, I'm going to start parameters. So these are arbitrary parameters that you or I could go ahead and enter in. T is just the name of it. Probably stands for title, right? That'd be my guess. Equals, and then remember plus the plus Titans. Remember the Titans is the movie. And it's ampersand. Y equals, this one's kind of confusing, ampersand plot. Y ampersand plot, I don't know. It's just how their API works. Equals short, right? Oh, this is another parameter. Y is just, it has to be defined, but it looks like it's empty. Here. So it must, what Y equals must tell us is give us the year, but I'm not necessarily, I don't need to search by year or anything like that. Plot equals short, so we want a shortened plot because there's going to be a plot summary that comes in. And then this last one's really important. API key equals Trilogy. Trilogy has an API key to this API that we all get to use for free because of them. And you need this. If we were to take it off, the OMDB API would be like, no, I'm not giving you anything. You haven't earned it. So this is, again, it's that request call. It has those three parameters, error, response, body. If we have an error, we'll deal with it. We won't do anything. Otherwise, we can verify that our response is good. A-OK, 200 OK, right? It's good. If it is, you notice this one's a little different. JSON.parse body. What does JSON.parse do? Anyone? It takes a string that would represent a JSON object. So imagine you had a string, right? If I were to do JSON.parse on this, probably see where I'm going. I could do .a, and what would I get? True, absolutely. So what this is telling me is the response from this API is not HTML. Can't be, right? Can you do JSON parse on HTML? Sure, you can, but you're not going to get anything good out of that. Something with it, right? Not only are we parsing it, which you could totally do on HTML, and it'll just be really weird, return nothing maybe. We're doing .imdb rating. So we're actually specifically getting a property out. Look like. Well, it's easy to tell. We can do a string JSON.parse. Why don't we see what this thing looks like? Then we can actually determine what we want to pull off of it. Oh. That's my extra code. That's what I get for trying to show you guys. Blows up. A whole lot. Title. It's rating things. Here's your IMDb rating. Just a property object that came back. Votes all kinds. What this is to show, and you're actually going to be using this OMDB in your next assignment. There's lots of things you can do over the, and we can use very similar interface dealing with the file system by dealing with the internet. Okay? So Let's go over this again, some of the important parts. I could change this. Correct. Greatest movie ever. One. Great. That is just a parameter that P, right? All of a question mark or then subsequently the ampersand are parameters and you can change them. You can probably take out plot short, get something different. But the one that's really, really important if you want this to work, I'm telling you this right now, you need API key equals trilogy at the end of whatever you're doing or it's not even going to work. And I'll show you. Literally nothing happened. Error might be there, or status code might not be 200. Why don't we see exactly what happened? The error was error. Well, that might be true, but we don't totally know that yet, so this is how we can kind of find out. The error was null. All right, so you're right. Gives you response.
You get a response, but it's not the data you're expecting. It's just like
Probably 500. That's a good guess. Let's check. See what the status code is then. Like, why isn't this working? 401. Does anyone know what a 401 is? Not allowed, unauthorized. It basically says you do not have access to whatever it is you're trying to do. And that's because we decided that we were too good for that trilogy API key. Should have kept it there. So don't take that off or you're going to have a whole lot of fun never working. So that's the important part. All right, so any questions on this before we go ahead and move into the last assignment? Cool. If you guys could slack out the last one, the OMDB request interactive. I don't know what number that is, probably 718.
We should have a file, you want like NPM install request.
Is there not a package JSON in there? Let me look at the.
With the JSON there. Would you like to send the JSON?
So yeah, so there's a command I forgot to show you, and I should have done that. The reason why that first one didn't work is there's a command npm nint. And I don't need to run it here because there is a package first before you do npm install whatever. It'll ask you a bunch of stuff. You just hit enter all the way through. It doesn't really matter. You can read them if you like, fill them out. But npm init initializes a new package JSON for you. Then you can do npm install whatever. So that's your hint there. No, there isn't a package JSON. That's how you make one. I want to show you an init from scratch too, just so you know what it looks like in a project that doesn't have one. So in this first request one, right here you see there's no package JSON. If I do npm init, ask me stuff. One, what's the package name, version, description, blah, blah, blah. Not that important right now, like I said. Just hit enter all the way through, and boom, one pops up. Now it exists. npm install request. And it doesn't yell at me this time. It builds a package lock, builds your node modules, and voila, there it is. Yep. When you do npm init and you hit enter all the way through, what does it say?
It says, to me, it says that I have to type a name.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a good question. So when you do npm init, Node has rules about how you can name the packages. So when it asks you for the name, make sure you have all lowercase, no spaces, no underscores, anything like that. It's just lowercase and dashes. Just as one missing package or whatever,
Yeah.
it needs to be all lowercase and only dashes is the other character. So you could do test dash one, request dash test or whatever, but you can't get too crazy on the name or it'll freak out. So you might not be able to hit enter depending on what you named your parent folder as. All right, we're gonna cover this in like a minute. We'll start talking about it. Okay, so let's talk about this. Did anyone finish? You people, nice. That's awesome. Good work, guys. Yeah, this one was another tough one. There's still, we're learning a lot today. If you didn't finish, that's okay. You shouldn't feel bad about that at all. We're still kind of understanding how this all works. So, and there was a lot here. This is the culmination of the whole lesson. So the first things first, am install is pretty important. I'm inside the solve directory, right? So we see that node modules appear, and that's how you know you've installed. If you look here, we've just still only got requests, so not a whole lot going on. So there's two ways you could solve this problem. One, you could just make it so they could give you a movie name, but the movie name couldn't have any spaces in it. Okay, it just had to be a one-word name. So Cinderella or something like that, right? And that's hard, but it is slightly easier than doing it with multiple words, right? Because you have to kind of change how the word looks to fit in the URL string. But anyway, we'll get to that. First things first, we have to have our request, or we can't do much of anything, right? Then, because we're using the command line, we're going to go ahead and pull that argument at index 2 out, and that's going to be our movie name. So again, index 2, we're familiar with that now. You're just not going to get anything good if you try to do index 1 or 0. You're going to get node information. You're going to get file information. So index 2 URL, we're going to be using this request object. We're going to want to build it, kind of get it out of the way, so we don't have to build it while we're making the call to request. Like we could put this all right here. It's going to be kind of messy, and this call would be, you know, kind of cluttered with some other logic that we don't necessarily need there. So why don't we build it here? We have our base. It's got the question mark p equals. But we'll go ahead and we'll plug in our movie name. We want the year. We want the short plot. And then we need our API key. Again, if you ran into this problem, nothing fun happened if you didn't include this. It builds a little URL. We'll be able to see what this looks like. It'll console log it out just for verification, right? Call it with request. And then we'll get our callback. We'll set that up to have our error, response, and body. If there's no error, and we have a 200 status code, we can go ahead and pull the release year off of that body, which again is going to be JSON. We got a JSON parse it. We have the &y, so we know we're going to have that year in there. We get the .year out, and we're off to the races, right? So why don't we see what that looks like? We can do node level 1, I think. Cinderella. We see here 2015. That's probably not true. I'm sure there's one in 2015, but I wanted the old one, right? That doesn't matter. But anyway, you can see a console log that built URL out to us right here. That's what we were building right at this point. And then we console log our release here because everything was hunky-dory. Now what happens if I spell that wrong? Right? The movie. Oh, it was a movie. Weird. That's not a movie. This here undefined, so it just kind of freaked out. Which is interesting. It gave us a status code 200 apparently because we got here, but that didn't give us anything good. So why don't we just check on that really quick because I'm curious. Look what the body is. Response false error movie not found. So look, there's another way you can do error handling. You can check out what this body is, inspect it a little bit, see what happens when things go wrong. If you're building a real client application, you'd want to know this, right? You want to know what happens. And you hope that the people at OMDB never change that so that your stuff breaks. Happens. Anyway, so that was how we get one-word movie names in. How do we get multi-word movie names in? Does anyone have an idea what we had to do to do that? Yeah? What was your idea?
So I made the movie name, processed our argument, the first, the second array, then plus, and then a string of plus the next argument.
I see. So you took each argument and you added them together.
Yeah.
How did you know when to stop?
Well, I'm testing that right now, but the stop after the first two words, because like I got like the matrix or jump to
Sure,
work.
sure.
I was just gonna see if I could keep trying it, and if one argument is empty, if it would still work.
I see. That's a good strategy. It can definitely work. And I believe from the process you can get the number of arguments that are passed in. So you could do it that way, totally. But you don't necessarily have to. There's other ways to do it too. So in this instance, we're just going to get all of the node args out. Just to make it easy. We're going to go ahead and loop through those node args. It's kind of what you're doing, right? Looping through all the node args. You're seeing when the array ends.
Oh yeah.
And then you can actually check the length. And that's how you know how many arguments came in. Then you can add them together. Plus. So this is very similar to what you're doing, but there's a way to check it.
Yeah.
So you're really close. It's awesome. There's other ways you can do this as well. Like, what if you didn't want to have to take every argument in and calculate all the arguments and add them together? You don't have to do that either. But this is one way you can go about doing it. Does this make sense to everyone? Like, I want to make sure before I move on, like, you can see what's going on here. And we can log through it if you'd like and see exactly what's happening. Yeah, what's up?
So that if statement inside the for is skipping over the first two arguments.
Yeah, basically it's saying if the I is greater than 2, but it's less than the length, then we're not going to add it to the movie name. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and add it to the movie name. We're going to see, oh, you're talking about this right here? We're talking about the if statement. So this is what skips over the first ones, right? Because we're not even starting at the 0 index.
Oh, but I'm wondering why it still says I am greater than 2 there. But
That's a good question. So if I is greater than 2, that's 3, 4, 5 to infinity, right? So if I is the second index, that's going to be the beginning of our movie name, right? And so do we want to add a plus in front of that? It's appending to the first argument. And you can go ahead and look at this. If we just console log node args I, we can see everything that's coming in and kind of see how it's working. And we'll just take a look at that. Do level 2. Forest, Gump. Oh, it's Forest and Gump, and then you can see down here the URL is created as Forest plus Gump, and then it tells us our year. Right? So yeah, it's one way you can go about doing it, and it's totally valid, and it works really, really well. Any questions on this? The rest of it's the same. We're adding the movie name in with the T equals, right? We have our API key, all the fun stuff, console log it out, request response. All of this is exactly the same. The only difference is now we're appending all of the potential words in the movie name together with pluses. Any questions on any of this?
Oh, no, it doesn't.
You could slightly change the logic, you're right. Cool. That's all we have for the lesson. So, yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Enjoy your 4th and be safe and stuff like that. The important stuff.
I'm used to yelling.